Hello, everyone, and welcome to the International African American Museum's Center for Family History podcast. I am your host, Dr. Shelley Viola Murphy, and I am thrilled to have you join us today for what promises to be an engaging and insightful discussion. I'd like to give a special welcome to our museum members. Also, this podcast is live streaming right now on StreamYard, Facebook, and also at the museum in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm hearing double. And also at the museum in Charleston. I'm going to keep going. We are proud to bring you this monthly podcast series held on the third Saturday of each month, where we explore topics that bring African American history, genealogy, and culture to life. Conversations are part of our ongoing commitment to connecting communities with the rich and diverse perspectives. Joined by Jennifer Randall, our lead architect of the family. Joined by Jennifer Randall, our as we move along the discussion today, I would like to encourage participants to move along the discussion today in the chat box. And don't forget to put a Q in front of them so we'll know that that is a question. We're going to open the floor for Q&A and discussion at the end of our discussion. So stay tuned for that. We're going to open now. Let's welcome our guest from the Black Loyalist Museum Society. So please take a moment to introduce yourself, share your title, and tell us a bit about your roles with the museum. And I will start with Andrea Davis. And tell us a bit about your roles with the museum.
So good afternoon. My name is Andrea Davis, and I am the Executive Director of the Black Loyalist Heritage Center in Georgetown, Nova Scotia. I am an 8th generation descendant of the Black Loyalists of Nova Scotia, and I say that very proudly. I am an 8th generation. I'm a grandmother and I'm a mother. Most of all, I'm a descendant, and that is what makes I'm a grandmother and I'm a mother that we're going to be sharing today. I don't really like talking about myself, so I'm going to leave it there and allow the other panelists to say who they are. I don't really like to introduce myself, so I'm going to leave it there and allow the other panelists to say who they are. I don't really like to introduce myself, so I'm going to leave it there and allow the other panelists to say who they are. I don't really like to introduce myself, so I'm going to leave it there and allow the other panelists to say who they are. I don't really like to introduce myself, so I'm going to leave it there and allow the other panelists to say who they are. I don't really like to introduce myself, so I'm going to leave it there and allow the other panelists to say who they are. I don't really like to introduce myself, so I'm going to leave it there.
Sure, I don't have anything open, so hold on. And also check and see if any of you guys have anything open like YouTube or something like that. And also check and see if any of you guys have anything open like YouTube or something like that. And also check and see if any of you guys have anything open like YouTube or something like that. And also check. Okay, somebody got it. Thank you. So Kelly, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, great. Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm
Kelly, go ahead and introduce yourself. Oh, we still got one open.
yeah, great. Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm
Kelly, go ahead and introduce yourself. Oh, we still got one open.
yeah, great. Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm
Kelly, go ahead and introduce yourself. Oh, we still got one. Go ahead, Kelly, try it.
I am a 8th generation descendant of one of the Black Loyalists who arrived in Shelburne in 1783. I am a director on the Black Loyalist Heritage Society Board of Directors. And my husband and I, along with Andrea, are also project managers for a genealogy project that we are setting up with the organization right now.
Thank you, Graham. You're on mute, Graham.
There we go. My name is Graham Nickerson, and I am also a board member on the Black Loyalist Heritage Society, and I am currently pursuing a PhD in Black Loyalist history at the University of New Brunswick.
Awesome. So what we've got today is some questions that I'll be asking. And so first, I would like to start off with Andrea as executive director. Could you tell us a little bit more about the museum, how it got started, and just a little background to get us going for the discussion?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Another untold story, but also one of Canada's best kept secrets is the Black Loyalist Heritage Center, which is nestled in the town of Birchtown. So on the next slide that I have here is a picture of what the Black Loyalist Heritage Center looks like from afar. I mean, the justice and the beauty of it right now does no justice. It was home of the largest free Black settlement in the early 1780s, where people had to actually do their voting with their feet because they were not permitted to use their hands. So this just tells you just how the situation and time had looked back then. Like I said, this unique historical site is nestled in the beautiful Birchtown Bay, which is located on the western shores of Shelburne, Nova Scotia. And it's also near the Shelburne Harbor, which is the third largest natural harbor in the world. So just imagine the beauty that has. As well, if you go to the next slide, I just want to tell you a little bit more about what we have here. Prior to any of these sites, including the one you just seen in this one as well, which is the old school, members of the Birchtown community established in the beginning what we call the Shelburne County Cultural Awareness Society, which later became the Black Loyalist Heritage Society. And the society was established to research and share genealogical history of the Black Loyalists and their descendants in the area. So between 1994 and 1997, the Black Loyalist Heritage Society acquired properties in Birchtown to create this beautiful historical site and museum. And it includes this old school that you have up there now, which was built in 1835 and was active as a school until 1961. It is a provincial heritage property. And so we take pride in being able to open our doors to have people go in and take a look around this beautiful, beautiful building, and also tell the story of the integrated school system that happened as well in Birchtown. And on our next slide, I'll tell you just a little bit about the pit house. So the Black Loyalists at one point did not have the provisions and lumber or other materials to build houses. And if they did, they would have had to carry them quite a distance. So they have these temporary housing, which where they dug a hole in the ground and then use pieces of log with moss to keep them warm in the winter. And these types of housing was actually in place for up to about 10 years. We have a replica of that on our site as well, which is our biggest feature of visitation. And so the next photo actually talked to us about the St. Paul's Anglican Church, which was built between 1888 and 1905, and it was in use until the early 1980s. It's still a big feature of ours. Although we don't use it as a church, there's also other events that we have, their weddings, Christmas events, and just for a place to go in and look at the beautiful architecture that's on the inside of the building. And the next slide should be about our founding members. As I had just spoke to you about our founding members, here's a list of some of the founding members of the Black Loyalist Heritage Society, and it was from their stories that we are where we are today. And so we're thankful to those members. Some of them have passed on, but others are still in the community. And I think I have about 2 more slides. So this here is the Black Burial Ground, which is also on the beautiful site. It's designated as a National Historical Site by Parks Canada in 1996. And we go there to give an idea of where the Blacks would have landed. It's a very unnavigable arm of the Birchtown Bay, so you can't get a ship close enough to unload and load people to see that beautiful site. But it's spectacular. And it's a big part of our tourism as well. And I think I might have 1 slide left. No, maybe that's it.
Okay. Good.
Oh,
And
I think that might be
I don't think there's another slide.
Okay, great.
Okay, that was the last one. Thank you for that. So, Graham, who were the Black Loyalists and what led them to join the Loyalist cause during the Revolutionary War? So I think the audience will be curious that we also define who these folks were, along with everything else with the museum in the center.
Yeah, so the Black Loyalists, like a definition of it would be quite broad. There were the better known Black Loyalists who joined in 1775 with Lord Dunmore. And so people who are familiar with Lord Dunmore's Ethiopian Regiment, those were early Black people who sort of flocked to the British cause. But there were a number of uprisings happening in the Tidewater area during that time. So it was much broader than just sort of the number of soldiers who fought in Virginia. There were also Black people in North Carolina and in South Carolina and Georgia and in the North as well. So many of them attempted to join the British forces. Others came as labor forces, but generally they're Black people who were either enslaved and fled their patriot enslavers to cross the lines and join the British, or there were free Blacks who came and joined, I think more politically, were involved in the idea of the abolition of slavery. So you have a whole spectrum of different types of people who were involved in it. And the majority of them, when the British evacuated, they first sort of fled to the coastal cities and then coalesced around New York City, and then either headed to Nova Scotia and what would be the maritime provinces, over to the UK. Some went to Germany, and a very large number of them ended up in Jamaica and elsewhere in the Caribbean. So it's a broad story. Some actually ended up in Australia as well. So it is a diaspora of a unique people with a very interesting and different sort of pathway when one thinks of Black history in North America.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. And I'm gonna ask another question. Were people that were enslaved or enslaved, were they promised anything if they joined the British forces?
It's a complicated question. There is this general belief that enslaved people were promised land and those sorts of supplies, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Those who joined the military were entitled to the same benefits that other soldiers would have gotten. You expected to get land and a means to set up yourself. Now, then once the Loyalists in general ended up in Nova Scotia, of course, there was this large petitioning to the government for support because there wasn't anything here for people to subsist on. We see a big collection of petitions from white Loyalists, and then a few Black Loyalist petitions for like compensation, the Loyalist compensation, but mostly it was people petitioning for land. But most of them seem to have had some kind of expectation through involvement with the British military. And then the rest, I think, sort of rolled the dice, right? And came with the expectation that things are going to be better than what they left behind.
So can you share a little bit of some of those challenges once they got to, say, in Nova Scotia? And because I'm assuming there were a lot of challenges and things. So can you just describe that little journey and some of those challenges for the audience?
Well, it started in the 13 colonies even before they left, where they were, they're constantly sort of trying to beat the clock before their former enslavers would show up and try to re-enslave them and take them back to where they had fled. And so, even in New York City, you have Virginians coming into the city and trying to grab people and take them back. So there's that whole stress right from the very beginning. And then blacks were allocated really poor shipping. And so we have things like shipwrecks and just, the stress of traveling by wind and sail. But many of the blacks who actually left New York City, they left in like the fall. So they arrived in like some of them in late November, and you can't see outside my window right now, but we have lots of snow.
Right.
And so you have thousands of people showing up at the same time in the wintertime. And 1783 was known as the year without summer because of the way the weather patterns were. So it was even in terms of Canadian winters, it was harsh. Then you can't really overemphasize the impact of the American Revolution and the conflict between ways of being, and they cut across all elements of society. So even the loyalists who came to what would be Canada, they weren't one big happy family, neither in the white community or in the black community. There were tensions. There was religious upheaval. There were social pressures. And so you have essentially this, for the first year in places like Shelburne, there's a journal from a guy named Benjamin Marston, who is the land surveyor in Nova Scotia, who shows up literally 6 days before thousands and thousands and thousands of loyalists show up, expecting to have their land lots surveyed out. And he talks about just how much dysfunction there is. They should have been trying to beat the clock, but instead they're doing things like fighting duels and setting their settlement on fire because they wanted to set off fireworks and things like that. So in all of that, you have land allocation issues, and the black people, of course, were on the losing end of that, where if somebody didn't like the way the land was allocated, they would just say, oh, we're not counting that. We're going to do it again. And so all of that sort of culminates in the late spring, early summer of 1784 in a series of rioting, both religious and racial, which tends to have forced black people either up into the back of where Shelburne is, over to some other community, or those who were in Shelburne ended up in fleeing to Birchtown. So it was violent and probably not a very pleasant year, the first year of the settlement of Nova Scotia.
Do we think it even got better?
Depends on how you define better. I mean, did
the living, did the racial tensions ease up a little bit once people were acclimated into that community?
I think sometimes the racial aspect in some ways is overemphasized. Like there's so much corruption and breakdown in social cohesion that the problems that arise for the Black Loyalists struggle all the way through until the exodus to Sierra Leone in 1792. And it's not, there's a racial element, of course, but they're also the Stephen Skinner, the agent who was supposed to be taking care of the finances of Birchtown, he's the guy who ends up buying up all the land from the Black people who decide to leave for Sierra Leone. And him and Stephen Bluke have this sort of road building company that is exploiting the Black community. So it's just, it was, I mean, the saying of desperate times calls for desperate measures. And
Sure.
so people were getting by whatever way they could do it in a pretty harsh situation.
Okay. So I'm going to come to Kelly. You're a board member and a genealogist. So what types of records or artifacts are available at the center for researchers or historians? So we heard Graham is working on his PhD. So now I'm going to come in and center, on the building and what's there for people to see. And I did see a comment in the chat that someone's coming there to visit. So, and I know who it is. It's a friend of mine. So go ahead, Kelly.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. First of all, Graham, thank you for telling the story. I always learn something new from you every time I hear you speak. So thank you so much for that. So our center itself it's beautiful. When you come in, it already starts to tell the story of the Exodus and the arrival of the Black Loyalists on the site. As it stands right now, we have a library full of information about Black Loyalists and their story. We also have family records that are on site, and it's very interesting because we have just started a genealogy project where we are taking those family records and anything that has to do with family trees that people have given us about their families who have been around for a long time. Any other oral histories, we're starting to put that now, developing a database so that we can have and call ourselves a genealogy center. So if people are coming in and want to look up on a database to see if they have ancestors who actually landed, or if there are records that kind of point them off into the direction of other settlements where some of the loyalists would have gone to, we're going to have those sorts of things. We also have a digital copy of the Book of Negroes, which of course was the history and the muster lists of people that came up from the New England states. And that's available for anybody that wants to come in and look at it. It's digitized, as I said, and we're just now in the process of updating the technology that goes behind that. And so we're working very, very hard to make sure that everything that we have is going to be much more accessible. Unfortunately, when we set the goal of this organization in place, one of the major parts was to have a genealogy center. So it's taken us a while. We're now at our 10-year anniversary to actually get this up and running, but we're pretty happy with the work that we've done. We're partnering with members of academia. St. Mary's University is working with us in digitizing the information that we have. Graham ran a really interesting conference last summer that coincided with our signature event, which is the Back to Birchtown event, and had people from the community to start bringing in more records and more photos and do more oral history for some of the actual history that exists there, because we haven't been really good at that. We haven't had the level of funding, or we haven't had the infrastructure to be able to allow us to do that, and now that's happening. So we're very, very excited about that.
Well, that's good to hear. And as you all know, as African Americans or descendants of Africans, and doing research, be it Canada, be it United States, there's going to be challenges. So what challenges, as far as for folks that are trying to trace, because we might have indication that somebody was in Canada and maybe return. So what challenges might they face in the typical genealogy journey trying to lock into if they had a Black loyalist?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's the quality of the records, right? It's
Sure.
always that. It's the quality of records, and it's always the ability to understand. I'm not a trained genealogist, not at all, but the ability to understand that there is so much information out there, and that there are thousands, literally thousands of databases that you can go into. But if you don't know where they are, and if you can't get access to them, then you're kind of hitting up on roadblocks. One of the other roadblocks is that our story of the Black Loyalists that come from the United States and then come into Canada, it kind of stops at the border. So here in Nova Scotia, we have a lot of information about when they came, but we don't know where they came from. So my husband and I actually visited the International African American Museum to get some kind of information on a distant relative of mine who essentially was from a plantation in Virginia, and there was nothing. So the people there said, okay, go to Colonial Williamsburg. And then we went to Colonial Williamsburg, which is a massive museum, and we sat down with the genealogist there, and it was just overwhelming. So it would take hours and days and months to be able to find information on one particular family member. It's out there, but it's not, it's not streamlined, and it could take, generations and generations of people that are doing that research to find that thread. So
yeah, and we know the challenges are there right off from the bat. So again, I think being able to share your information about your center, and you never know who's going to listen to this, and there still might be that Virginia, because my expertise is Virginia, so we might want to chat. Regardless of what you might have seen, there might be something else available. So you never know. And there's, folks that listen to this all have the area where they're researching. So I'm going to come back to Andrea. So are there connections between the Black Loyalists and other diaspora African communities globally? And again, looking at even partnership opportunities or connections. And do you see that, or is there?
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Shelley. And just further to what Kelly said, we don't really need to rely on our documentation. We also have elders and descendants within the communities as well. And both Kelly and Graham know that we are losing our elders at rapid speed, and we're not able to obtain those stories from them. So that definitely is something that we too need to just to get a little better at, because a lot of them, through trauma and whatever else, are not so keen to release those stories to our generation. And so we do miss out on a lot of that. And of course, it goes back to memory as well, and just understanding how we grew up, where we grew up, and just sharing those stories. Sometimes there are conflicts in the communities when there are opposing stories or different stories by different family members. So we can understand that the struggle could be there, and Black memory is so important. And just in terms of connection, I mean, it needs to be known that in Nova Scotia, there are 54 distinct communities locally that make up Nova Scotia. And I do have that information available to anybody who would like to see it. But we've been everywhere. And I always like to say, we're not going anywhere. The biggest part is, and Kelly knows this the most, is that I always say we were not meant to survive. But we did, because I'm here, Kelly's here, Graham, are here, and so are our children. And so the story will continue regardless. One of the greatest highlights that I would like to say is I recently connected with the mayor of South Africa. And so it was just through fluke that someone had come into the museum, and he picked up the phone and he made the call right while I was there. And it was fantastic. It had made definitely my day. And so we do have a call coming up in January due to scheduling, but just to be able to speak with the mayor of South Africa and to build that connection and that bridge there is just so important. And as well, I've had an opportunity to be featured in the New York Times, where I've spoken about the history of Birchtown and Nova Scotia, as well as CNN did an article on us. We have our own beer, Back to Birchtown beer, which is fantastic. We have our own YouTube channel. We have our own coat of arms. I see Graham has the flag in the background there, which you're about later, which if anyone's interested, let me know. I can ship it out to you now that the postal strike is over. But also I had an opportunity to go to New York this year at Francis Tavern and open up an exhibit on the Birch trials, which was fantastic. And there were several Blacks that were commissioned in New York as well. So I got to speak about a few of those. Definitely more work needs to be done. And I think through this conversation, we are going to, I believe after this, be able to kind of hang our story on a hook that everybody is going to want to indulge in after this and connect with us on, for sure.
And I think as a genealogist myself, I had people in those states that went to Nova Scotia, and now it's tracking to find out, is there a connection? And then some families know, again, that some people came from Canada. So how did they get there would be the question. And I'm thinking of some folks in Michigan where the early settlers in a few counties came from Canada. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, in the 1800s, and I'm thinking, wait, we need to back up a little bit. Let's find out if we can track that. So I'll make sure they get to hear this, because I keep thinking they're Canada coming down. So I'm going to come to Graham to the next question. So we're talking about the Black Loyalists, and I'm going to make an assumption so you can clarify it. Men and women, number one. But what role did they play pretty much in shaping those communities in Nova Scotia? And basically, were they building these communities, or because they were all there as groups, it just develops into a community? And because Andrea said, what, 54 communities just in Nova Scotia. So can you address that a little clearer for us on the, what their role was?
Yeah. So let's take a look at like what we mean by community.
Yeah.
And I think with the Black Loyalists, sometimes because of the way the relationship between Black community and white community, the way it worked, you may have one thing is that the status of Blacks in British North America was complicated. Sometimes people would be free, sometimes they would be indentured, sometimes they would be enslaved, and they could, through the course of their lifetime, sort of find themselves in various states, and not always like enslaved towards free, sometimes free and then finding themselves indentured or enslaved again. And so when you kind of conceive of community, I myself like to think, like, if there's, say you have 5 houses in a farm community in the woods somewhere, and one of those farmers has an indentured or enslaved Black person, that's still a Black community, because it represents the same, it's a continuation of Northeastern and the pattern of enslavement in the Northeast, which is kind of like that, where you have maybe one enslaved person living with a white family. Then other times you have really distinct enclaves of Black people like Birchtown that are separate and people have agency, and they want to be there because they're separate from the pressures of being really, really close to a white community, the threat that poses. So Nova Scotia has at least 54 documented Black communities, but there are more. And if you look at, one way to sort of like appreciate that is when you look at the Black communities in Nova Scotia, you look at a map of historic Black communities, there are very few of them in Shelburne, Queens, and Yarmouth County, despite that being the largest concentration of Black people. So we just haven't really, and this is where the genealogy comes in, because we have to look in these little tiny places where there may be 1 or 2 Black people. And again, as genealogists, that process of in the 19th century, people tended to start passing as white. And so they disappear from the records as Black people and start to appear in the records as white people. You can look in the records and you'll see people born Black and dying white. And so the contributions of Black people in Nova Scotia, primarily the Black churches. So we had an African Methodist church. We had an African Baptist church. Those churches were very closely connected to Black people in Maryland and Virginia. and also connected to Upper Canada and Michigan and Ohio and those sorts of places. So there was this sort of shadow society of Black people who were only now, as we sort of combine traditional historic methodologies and genealogy to trace and get these little tiny snippets of people, of micro histories, that we'll find people, or we'll find buildings. And something that one of the previous, I think, Kelly had mentioned, is that we really run into these issues of where, say you have a congregation that has a lot of political power locally in Nova Scotia. As soon as you cross the border somewhere else, it's like that power stops, but it doesn't. We have these churches and large religious movements have a long reach, and they're connected to other Black communities, and we just don't understand it because of the way that borders have impeded our understanding of our society.
So this sounds familiar to research we do in the United States. Same things we're faced to. So Kelly, has the story of these Black Loyalists been preserved and passed down through generations? Andrea mentioned oral history. Are people able to contact the museum or the center and say, my ancestor was Shelley Murphy. I believe she went there, returned to Michigan or whatever it was. And I have some other details, excuse me, about that. Are you guys open to hear those stories and make those connections?
Very good question. That's a very good question. It's a bit of a loaded question. So first of all, I'm gonna go back to the first part of your question: is have those stories been preserved? So when I went to school, when I was coming up through the school system, and when Andrea was coming up, and when Graham was coming up, there was no mention of Black Loyalists in our history books. There was nothing that was talked about. We lived in communities that were kind of like at the edge of town, literally on the other side of the tracks. Mm-hmm. And our history was only all about the white history, and it was very, not a pun, no pun intended. It was very whitewashed. So when we started to come to understand who we were and where we came from, I think that was kind of like, it was also when our community came together with the inception of putting together the Black Loyalist Heritage Society, which essentially became a museum after lots and lots of hard work, fundraising, et cetera, et cetera. So it took us a while. It was only in the very end of my mother's and father's generation that we felt like we had a history and that we were able to start to bring all of that together. So there was that. And then we had some really good people who, one of the gentlemen who's still living in our community, his name is Ken Brown. He was a high school teacher, but he developed part of the history curriculum and put it in the Shelburne school so that there was at least something that we could pass down and start to tell our story. So there is that. The oral histories, as Andrea has said, back in my parents' generations, it wasn't always something that people wanted to share. There was a lot of shame that came around it. There was not a lot of celebration about coming from the Black community because we were not the community people wanted to be attached to. So there was that, and there was certain amount of maybe some strife among the Black community members itself as Andrea said, whose memory is what. How do people kind of play out in that? So there's that as well. And then now you bring us up to where our parents' generation are coming to the end of their lives, and now they want to tell the stories. They really feel that need to tell the stories, and we can't get to them quickly enough. We're just, we're getting our genealogy program set up and starting to do oral histories, and some of those histories are there, but it wasn't enough. So we're playing catch up. So the oral histories are coming, but now we are the generation that's telling those oral histories, and we don't have all the story. We have bits and pieces. So, some of us were lucky enough to sit with our moms and dads before they passed, and they told their stories, but for me, it just wasn't enough. That's not enough. Anyway, that's that part of the story. The other part is, and Andrea, I'm so sorry to do this, but for people that want to start asking questions about what we have at the center, they would have to contact Andrea. We're still not fully resourced, so anybody who wants to give us a whole pile of money to help us to do what we're doing, by all means do that. But we are getting ourselves together where we're going to be able to now to plug into a digital database that will help people. And hopefully by the time, probably in the next couple of years, we'll be able to have that go online where people from all over the world can tap in. But right now, it's just a matter of picking up the phone, having a conversation with poor Andrea, who's, just that one particular person. She does have a genealogist kind of person that's working with her part-time, who has been absolutely amazing to help us track down some information. Graham is also a really huge source, and we've also got a board member who is in London but has spent a lot of time in Sierra Leone, who is also an historian. So the short answer is that if you have a question, contact Andrea, and we will find a way to get an answer back or find somebody who can answer them.
And Andrea, we'll make this even bigger and just say the door is open.
Yes, the door.
Anyone that's got information or feel they have links, but I want to make sure, is it only to Nova Scotia where the Black Loyalists were at? Or is there other places in Canada?
I'm going to let Graham answer that question.
Okay.
But before he does, thank you, Kelly, for that. I don't mind. I love the emails. But we also have a newly formed genealogy account, an email account. So you can also, people can also email genealogy@blackloyalist.com. And I'll put it in the chat here. It's the private chat right now, but it could be shared out. I'll put the information in there. I would love to hear from anyone, just asking any question that you would like. There's no silly questions. Just bring them on so that they can be responded to. So
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Graham?
Yeah, so the Maritime region sort of received the majority of Black Loyalists in British North America. The majority of Black Loyalists, in the broadest term, ended up in the Caribbean. And I think, you have to have a Jamaican expert on here, but my understanding is that most of them ended up re-enslaved there. Unfortunately. But in British North America, we had Black Loyalists arrive in Nova Scotia, which then split apart into Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So I'm in New Brunswick right now. There is a smaller but robust Black Loyalist community and broader Black community in the province here. There were Black Loyalists who ended up in Prince Edward Island, which was, by the way, the only province in Canada that had positive slave law. So positive slave law was implemented in Prince Edward Island in the same way as in the U.S. in the southern states.
Now, you got to explain what a positive slave law is, because that's a new one for me.
So enslavement in most places was enforced as property law. So chattel slavery, as in, like, I've got a horse, a table, a cow, 2 slaves, my house, a fence, like just property. And so the slavery was protected by property rights, where in positive law is where you actually address the legal status of slavery and positively enforce it. In Prince Edward Island, they enacted a law that being baptized did not emancipate a enslaved Black person. So if you're familiar with the Mansfield decision in 1772 in Great Britain, the findings of that verdict in Britain was that it took positive slave law to enforce slavery. So that was sort of one of the sort of sparks that really set off Black aims during the American Revolution of emancipation and self-emancipation. So we had also enslaved people, Black Loyalists in Quebec or Lower Canada. there were people like Peter Pierpoint who came up through the Hudson Valley and into Upper Canada, or what is Southern Ontario. And then there are Black Loyalists who ended up a huge Black Loyalist community in London. And a smaller one ended up going to Germany with the British mercenary Hessian forces.
Hessians.
And then because of the British, basically their policy of sending convicts to Australia, of course, Black Loyalists started ending up being transported to Australia. So you have not a large Black Loyalist community, but a Black Loyalist community in Australia, and of course in Sierra Leone and that area. So there is a large diasporic community that is only now kind of really starting to touch the edges of itself. Like when we were, I can't speak for everybody, but when I was a kid, all I knew about myself was that I didn't look like everybody else, and that meant that my ancestors came from Africa and that they were enslaved, and that I would never know where I came from. So everything that we do is a step up from what my expectations were.
And that's why we got to keep doing the things that we're doing. So is there a simple list? We know we saw a movie, The Book of Negroes. So for the museum in the center there, is there a list? And again, as a genealogist, I know surnames aren't always the route to go, but that could be some help, for some folks, if there's names and surnames that we can look at. So Andrea, you're shaking your head.
Yes, that's a great question. And what I did earlier in the summer with my summer staff is I actually had them go through our then records and I guess take out names, familial names. And we actually have a list that is actually at the center, but it wasn't posted because, of course, I always go through the board of directors and kind of get their approval on this just to make sure I'm not missing anything. But yes, we definitely do have a list of some familial names and also locations. It's surprising that like my family, my mother's family was born in a white area, which would be in Barrington, which is away from Shelburne. And so there were Black settlements all over Shelburne County that we haven't yet had a chance to really speak and identify. And I think it was brought to me at some point, not just familial names, but also grave sites and homesteads, because that's one thing that we're missing, or a couple of things that we're missing is every time the graveyards kind of go back and cut down the bushes and trees, we tend to see more grave stones and crosses and stuff that we did not know were there. And so we need to actually get somebody on this so that we can, as the Black Loyalist Society, we can continue to have it known that we were here. And we've done archaeological digs. We've done 2 digs that has shown that we were here. And another thing too is that I've just recently made the municipality, the government aware, both in town of Shelburne and the government, the municipality, that any area that they choose to maybe sell off or try to dig or anything like that, that they need to reach out to us first. And I had those sit down conversations with them. And so that is great, because I don't want them to think that our eyes are closed and that you're not paying attention to the stuff, because they'll sell, most places, towns and communities will sell off things and not realizing that that building has historical reference to it, even though it doesn't have an interpretation panel beside it. So there's there's those different kinds of things that we're always looking at. And it's so important to all of us. And I think about myself and my own story and just having darker complexion. And it has always been something that I've wondered where it came from when I look at other members of my family and I see that it's not as prevalent. So I've always been stuck there, just trying to understand that I am African, but I'm also partly Irish as well. So there's parts of this DNA. Kelly's laughing because we've talked about this. There's parts of our DNA, like she said, with our history, we grew up not knowing about. No,
Sure.
Our dad didn't tell us that, there's Black Irish in the family. Like nobody explained that to us. And so these are things, as new information comes in, I too am also learning and also taking that information and educating that out to the communities. And to the board and to the world. So that's a great platform that we have with that information.
Absolutely. And I imagine for those here in America, they're going to be taking those DNA tests because that's such a topic right now. A lot of discussion on that. And in 2025, we will have a Saturday podcast on DNA and how folks are doing it and African American view on that in connections with Melvin Collier. And so, yes, and he's done some tremendous work in that field and has a blog, and he blogs all of his findings and challenges and everything, which helps all of us.
Yes.
So if I think of the Book of Negroes as we wind down a little bit here, if I remember correctly, that was 3,000. Did all 3,000 actually come to the shores of Nova Scotia? And is that the numbers that we might be looking at? And is this going to Graham?
It's going to Graham.
Okay.
Sorry, Graham.
So now I'm looking at numbers because I want the audience, and I think we've got some questions that are there. And again, I think of the movie, and the whole 3,000 and this, that, and other. But I know not all, because you mentioned that all might have hit your shores. So what numbers are we actually looking at?
The 3,000 it's a mix of free and enslaved Black people who came from New York. Or like they were.
But could have came from somewhere else to New York, right?
Yes. Yeah. Most of them came from, I think the majority are from Virginia. Majority
Okay.
of the Black Loyalists in the Book of Negroes came from Virginia. But the thing is that the Black people who escaped through like Savannah or Charleston, they are not documented. And there are a number of Black people from New York City who are also not documented. They basically got on ships, whatever. I mean, they knew that they weren't going to be granted their freedom through the trials at Francis Tavern. So they were like, well, see you later. And
basically we're running away, getting on the boat and going and getting off where they put us off at.
Right. And so there's we are at least Kelly and I think all three of us are descendants of Peggy Gwynn, who if you're familiar with the petition of Peggy Gwynn, she is the wife of Henry Gwynn, who was our great back grandfather. And her petition was denied by Carleton. So, but there's a Peggy Wise who shows up conveniently where Henry Gwynn is. So the names are all like people are traveling under aliases and all of these things. So there's so much work to do in terms of combining genealogical approaches and traditional historical approaches to even identify who was here, because you won't find a guy. My family, there's a huge family of Black guys who aren't in the Book of Negroes, and it's a prominent.
The last name is G-U-I.
G-U-I.
That's one of the names that I mentioned about. That's one of the surnames that came back from Canada to Michigan. Wow. Is Guy.
Wow.
Right. So
we're gonna have to talk.
Yeah. And we don't even. So there's going to be a whole lot of research still to identify these people, and they're not. And it's not just a matter of like, oh, we're putting a name in a box or whatever. Like these people did things, and they went places for reasons, and we don't understand. We have this huge influx of Black people who come to Shelburne County and Nova Scotia in general. But if you went to Shelburne now, the Black population is relatively small. And we really have no idea. It's too convenient to sort of say, oh, well, they all went to Sierra Leone. Well, only a third of the Black Loyalists went to Sierra Leone. That leaves 2/3. So where did the other 2/3 go? There are literally Black communities that existed that no longer do. And you can see the process by which they were erased, right? They just disappear. And so we need to build those communities back again to understand why they were there, right? And what they did. And so if that answers your question.
It does. And again, there's common themes to what we're trying to learn here. And I don't want to just say enslaved folks in the South, because enslaved people were also in North America. And again, you mentioned, well, basically New York and this, that, and other. Can't leave Maryland out either, because Maryland, and again, looking at some of these connections, because I think they all connect, but if we got a base of at least about 3,000 people, and if there's some oral history in families, because I'm going to turn this last question over to Andrea, but if we at least got that, the possibilities of connections could come about, which could either rebuild your community you're looking at, but it also satisfy my family history type thing. So I think we got a win-win situation here. So Andrea, how can individuals support the work of the Black Loyalist Heritage Center to make sure this history gets preserved? We know money's always going to be a factor, grants, money. What other way could you see or put out to the public on how we could help, preserve this history or connect this history?
Thank you so much. Another powerful question. One of the best ways is to become a member of the Black Loyalist Heritage Society, and that can be done online. I can also send out a link to that information. Every year we do a newsletter, but throughout the year we do several projects and several events. Actually, we're filling up our calendar for next year because it is our 10th year anniversary of when the center opened. And it's an opportunity for us to also connect with the 250 of the American states as well. And that work has already been started with New Jersey. I did do something with New Jersey, and I think maybe New York, I'm not sure, but these things are still coming through the pipelines here. And also social media. I did put some of our social media information there as well. And it helps to understand that through social media, you'll get to see who our board members are, as well as who my staff are in the community. But also understanding the various events that we have coming up and the various activities we have coming up. So one of the other ways of learning about us and becoming connected to us is through our virtual tour and through our educational guide. So we do have a fantastic virtual tour that was done by a previous senior interpretive guide. It is quite popular. It is fantastic in terms of the knowledge of that information, and it is very well presented in that video. So we do offer that out for a fee. We also have our education guide as well, which is fantastic. So that is another document. Yeah, it's a really great document that kind of helps to understand and educate, similar to what Kelly was saying with Mr. Ken Brown, who began the education of the Black community and the Black history. We also do the same as well. Several projects we're doing, and Kelly could speak to this. We're working on our strategic plan, which will take us into the next 5 years, which I'm so happy to be part of. And it encompasses a lot with the community, and also keeps in mind of who we are, what we can offer, and all of those elements of a board, of a society, and the work that the society does. And we talked a little bit about the Book of Negroes. So I just noticed online that it looks like they're doing a Book of Negroes too, but I don't have all of the details. I don't know if Lawrence Hill is part of that as well. I haven't spoken with him in quite a while. but I'm looking into that to see if that is a thing. We are also still actively trying to pursue or repatriate the Book of Negroes from the museum in Britain. We have started some of that legwork, but it is a lot of work to do. But we're hoping to repatriate that and bring the book home where it belongs in town. So that's an active thing that we're doing. A couple of other things as well as we're working on an African Nova Scotia seafaring project. So what is not known is that there were a lot of African American and still are African American sea fishers and fishermen, also those in the boat building industry that did a lot of that work. So we're trying to tell that story that hasn't been told as well. And I'm not sure if I've missed anything, but we're looking also within our community so that we can, and this is a project of mine, is so that we can get a street named after our ancestors.
Sure.
We don't have that. If you go into Shelburne, you'll see older names, older British names, which might be not what we want to see or hear, but we're trying to, have something for us to show that we were here and we're still here as well. So I think that's, I'm not sure, Kelly and Graham, if you want to finish this off, if I've missed anything going into our 10th year anniversary regarding the center.
You got it all. You've definitely got it all. Yeah, you touched on all the big points. Thank you.
So what I'm going to do right now is check the chat box for some, questions from the audience. And then I'm going to come back to each of you. So a little bit, think about what is the one takeaway you want someone to walk away from this session today. So let me go in here. And I know Dr. Andrea Roberts was on here, and she's with the University of Virginia. She said, looking forward to visiting in March with the folks from the African Nova Scotian Road to Economic Prosperity.
Yes.
So, Andrea, we want to report. And again, thank you. And if anyone has questions, please, I'm looking through them right now. I do have someone named Debbie said hello from the Bronx, which is New York. I purchased some $20 silver coins from the Royal Canadian Mint, released in 2021, honoring the Black Loyalists.
Yes.
Learn something new every day. So thank you for that. And Graham, you commented there. Let's see. So Andrea also said, please contact and take advantage of a grant opportunity, including Nova Scotia. So she's got a link right there. So that might be an opportunity for you. And that was at 1:41 p.m. my time.
Okay.
And let's see. And I can put you two together also.
Okay.
And let's see. Debbie commented on Graham's response. They're beautiful cousin. My mother is a Black Loyalist descendant. Looks like the last name is White, Kane, and Johnson last names. And she's been doing her family history in Halifax and Dartmouth, NS, and Elm Hill, NB since 2000. I look forward to visiting the Black Loyalist Heritage Center in Shelburne. So great, another connection. Let's see. I'm scrolling through. Karen K in Maryland posted about an annual Lemon Project Symposium, and I believe they're accepting proposals for speakers. So that might be another opportunity, and that's in Williamsburg.
Wow.
The Lemon Project with the College of William and Mary. So I'm not seeing any other questions. So I'm going to turn this around, and I'm going to start with Kelly, and then I'm going to go to Graham, and then I'll go to Andrea. What is the one thing you would like people to take away from today?
Wow, that's a hard question, Dr. Sheller. There's so much. There's so much. Well, the thing I want for people to be able to take away is that we are a shining star in Nova Scotia. We are a very small community with a big heart, and that museum is it's kind of like it is a shining star for people who want to find out about where the Black Loyalists came And the projects that we have going on now will absolutely help people to identify if they have links into those families, like what happened, where did they go, where did they come from, who might still be there now in the community that they could connect with. We want people to know that. That's the big takeaway.
Okay, Graham?
Yeah, I think the message is that we're still here. We didn't disappear. We didn't all die. There are vibrant Black Loyalist communities in all of the eastern provinces in Canada, and we are, I think, poised and ready and waiting to connect to our family in the U.S. and elsewhere.
Sure. Andrea.
Wow. I would just like to say that the Black Loyalist Heritage Center is not a museum where artifacts go to die. We are vibrant, we are relevant, and we are ready to take on 2025 with a vengeance, with fury, but also keeping in mind that we are going to connect. It's going to be our year of connection, and that may be our theme. It's going to be our year of connection. And we're going to become, as we discussed in our strategic planning, we're going to become the hub of Black Loyalist heritage and Black Loyalist families and Black Loyalist lives. And we're going to bring the stories of our ancestors to life.
I think the stories are critical because this is what, as a researcher, I'm looking for the story. I want to hear. I know there's trials and tribulations and challenges, for even the work that I do. And I think about it, but everybody's got a name and everybody's got a story. Right. So I want to thank you all for joining us today for this special episode with the International African American Museum Center for Family History podcast. We're just gonna thank our guests today because a lot of new information, but there's so much more that we can be part of and share. And so sharing your invaluable knowledge, your perspective, and your dedication to preserving that history of the Black Loyalists. And I will say some of my expertise are on the Black Patriots. So I'm learning more about the Loyalists because of that. They're connected, definitely. So your work is not only inspiring, but it's crucial to ensuring that these stories are going to be remembered and celebrated. And I think you guys are on that track. To the viewers and the listeners, whether you joined us on StreamYard, YouTube or Facebook, or if you're in the museum right now in Charleston, we appreciate your time and your engagement. Your participation is what makes this podcast such a meaningful experience for folks. And again, we come on the third Saturday of every month, and we always will welcome folks that have been on to come back and definitely give us updates. I do want to give a quick reminder that the next podcast will be January the 18th. I have Dr. Andrea Douglas out of the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center in Charlottesville, Virginia, and Malika Pryor Martin, who is over the learning and engagement at the International African American Museum, to come in and have a discussion about the importance of these centers like yours, museums, and the things that we're trying to preserve. And it'll come from different perspectives as well. And so, again, mark your calendars on that and stay tuned to social media because more information will be coming out. And we'll also post the website and things to the Black Loyalist Museum and Center on our Facebook page as well. Appreciate y'all giving you back your time on a Saturday. And thank you. Thank you to all that attended as well. And Jennifer, if you want to take us out, we'll appreciate that.
Thank you. Wow.
Thank you, guys.